The champagne glass in my hand felt heavier than it should have as I watched my wife Clara work the room like a politician on election night. She glided between clusters of Manhattan's elite, her silver dress catching the ballroom's crystal chandeliers, leaving a trail of laughter and admiration in her wake. I was the +1 to my own marriage, standing against the wall like expensive wallpaper. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning our charity auction. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Club. Our first item is a private dinner with our hostess, the incomparable Clara Davidson, PR maven and socialite extraordinaire. My stomach dropped. Clara hadn't mentioned this. She stood at the front of the room, beaming under the spotlight, her arms spread wide as if embracing the entire crowd. The bidding started at $5,000. $10,000, called out Richard Vale, the billionaire real estate mogul whose face graced business magazines monthly. He stood near the bar, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile predatory. $15,000, another voice from the crowd. $25,000. Vale again, his eyes locked on Clara like a hunter sizing up prey. The room buzzed with excited whispers. I felt heat rising in my chest, a combination of embarrassment and something darker. Clara was eating up the attention, practically glowing as the numbers climbed higher. $50,000, Vale's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. The auctioneer looked around the room. 50,000 going once, going twice. $100,000. Vale's final bid echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Clara's hand flew to her chest in mock surprise, but I could see the genuine thrill in her eyes. She was loving every second of this public display, this validation of her worth in cold, hard cash. Sold to Mr. Richard Vale for $100,000. The auctioneer's gavel came down with finality. The crowd erupted in applause. Clara curtsied playfully, then blew a kiss toward Vale, who raised his champagne glass in a toast. I watched this performance with growing disgust, my fingers tightening around my glass until I thought it might shatter. This wasn't charity. This was something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Margaret Thornton, chairwoman of Vale Industries Board of Directors. She'd been trying to oust Vale for months, citing his inappropriate behavior and reckless spending. I'd met her at a corporate function last year, back when I still thought networking mattered. Margaret, this is Davidson from Hartwell Strategic. You need to see something. 20 minutes later, Margaret Thornton walked into the ballroom, flanked by two people I recognized as Vale Industries' head of HR and their chief legal counsel. The party was still in full swing, but I noticed several photographers had mysteriously appeared, their cameras ready. Margaret approached the podium where Vale was now holding court, Clara hanging on his arm like a trophy. Mr. Vale, Margaret's voice carried across the room, cutting through conversations like a blade. I believe congratulations are in order. You've just purchased a private evening with Mrs. Clara Davidson for $100,000 in company funds. The room fell silent. Vale's face went pale, then red. Clara's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Margaret, this is hardly the place, Vale started. On the contrary, this is exactly the place. Margaret gestured to the HR director, who stepped forward with a tablet. According to our compliance department, any expenditure over $50,000 requires board approval. Additionally, purchasing private time with married women creates significant liability issues for the company. The photographers were moving closer now, their cameras clicking rapidly. Clara tried to step away from Vale, but Margaret wasn't finished. The board will be conducting a full investigation into this transaction, Mr. Vale. I trust you understand the implications. Vale's face had gone from red to ashen. He looked around the room, suddenly aware that hundreds of New York's most connected people were witnessing his public humiliation. The same people who would be gossiping about this tomorrow, spreading the story through every boardroom and country club in the city. Clara stood frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. The spotlight that had made her glow with pride moments earlier now felt like an interrogation lamp. I finished my champagne and set the glass on a nearby table. For the first time in months, I was genuinely smiling. The evening news would have a field day with this. I woke up the next morning to find Clara already dressed and pacing our living room like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Tribeca condo, I could see photographers gathered on the street below, their telephoto lenses pointed upward like artillery. No, you don't understand, Clara was saying into her phone, her voice pitched higher than usual. This was taken completely out of context. It was for charity. I poured myself coffee and settled into my chair to watch the show. The morning news was playing on our wall-mounted television, and sure enough, there was Clara's face filling the screen under the headline, "Charity Scandal. Billionaire pays $100K for private evening with married PR executive." "This is your fault," Clara hissed, covering her phone with her hand. "You could have stopped this. You could have bid on me yourself, made it look like a joke between husband and wife." "With what money?" I asked calmly. "My salary doesn't exactly run to six-figure charity gestures." "You're supposed to protect me." Her voice cracked slightly. "That's what husbands do?" I almost laughed. Protect her from what? Her own desperate need for attention? Her willingness to auction herself off to the highest bidder as long as it came with applause? "David, we need to talk." Clara had ended her call and was staring at me with an expression I'd seen her use on difficult clients. "I'm bringing in Tessa to handle this. She knows how to manage crisis situations." Tessa Lynn, Clara's best friend since college, and now one of Manhattan's most ruthless corporate lawyers. She specialized in making problems disappear, usually by destroying anyone who dared to create them. I'd never liked her, and the feeling was mutual. "Handle what exactly?" I asked. "The fact that you let another man buy you like a prize at a county fair?" Clara's face flushed red. "It was for charity, David. $100,000 for children's cancer research. How can you make that sound dirty?" "Because it wasn't about the children, was it? It was about you, standing up there, basking in the attention while another man proved you were worth more than I could ever afford." Before Clara could respond, the doorman buzzed up. Tessa Lynn had arrived. Tessa swept into our apartment like she owned it, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun, her designer suit immaculate despite the media circus downstairs. She'd always been beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way that reminded me of expensive knives. "David," she said, acknowledging me with barely a glance before turning to Clara. "We need to control this narrative immediately. The story is already spreading beyond the local news." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've drafted a statement explaining that this was a misunderstanding, that the auction was pre-approved by Vale Industries for charitable purposes, and that any suggestion of impropriety is baseless." I leaned forward. "What about the part where it wasn't pre-approved? Margaret Thornton made that pretty clear." Tessa's eyes narrowed as she looked at me. "Margaret Thornton is a bitter woman trying to stage a corporate coup. Her word means nothing." "Her word means everything when she's backed up by HR and legal counsel." "David," Clara interrupted, "you're not helping." "I'm not trying to help," I said. "I'm trying to understand why my wife thought it was appropriate to let another man buy her like a commodity." Tessa set down her papers and fixed me with a stare that could have frozen vodka. "David, I understand you're upset, but Clara's reputation affects your reputation too. Unless you want to be known as the man who couldn't satisfy his wife, I suggest you get on board with damage control." The threat was subtle but clear. "Cross us, and we'll make sure everyone knows you're inadequate." It was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd come to expect from Tessa. "Actually," I said, standing up, "I think Clara's reputation should stand on its own merits. After all, she's the one who chose to participate in that auction." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Tessa's voice drop to a whisper as she began strategizing with Clara. They were planning something, and it probably wasn't good for me, but two could play that game. I had Margaret Thornton's direct number, and she'd been very interested in my observations about Richard Vale's behavior. She'd also mentioned that Vale Industries was conducting a full investigation into the incident. Maybe it was time to provide them with some additional context. The parking garage beneath Vale Industries' headquarters was dimly lit and mostly empty at 7 in the morning. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes when Richard Vale's cherry red Ferrari finally descended the ramp. He parked in his reserved spot near the elevator, the same spot he'd used every morning for the past 5 years, according to my research. Vale stepped out of his car, adjusting his tie and checking his reflection in the Ferrari's window. He looked older than he had at the gala, the stress of the past week evident in the lines around his eyes. "Mr. Vale," I called out, stepping from behind a concrete pillar. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. "Who are you? How did you get down here?" "David Davidson, Clara's husband." I walked closer, keeping my hands visible and my voice calm. "I think we need to talk." Vale's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained wary. "Look, Davidson, if this is about the auction, it was all perfectly innocent. Just a charity event that got blown out of proportion. $100,000 for a private evening with my wife." I let the words hang in the air. "Tell me, Mr. Vale, what exactly were you planning to get for that money?" "It was for charity," Vale repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. "Was it?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot I'd taken from social media. This is from your Instagram account, posted 3 hours after the auction. Quote, "Sometimes the best investments are in personal relationships. Looking forward to collecting on my winning bid." Vale's face went pale. He'd probably forgotten about that post, made in the heat of the moment while he was still riding high on his public display of wealth and power. I was just excited about supporting charity. Right. I pocketed my phone and pulled out a small flash drive. This contains security footage from the gala, including some very interesting conversations you had with your friends about what you planned to do during your private evening with Clara. I wasn't bluffing. I'd paid the club's head of security $5,000 for copies of the relevant footage. It was amazing what people would say when they thought no one was listening. "What do you want?" Vale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to hold a press conference, today. Apologize publicly for your inappropriate behavior, admit that the auction was a mistake, and donate another $100,000 to the charity to make up for the damage you've caused." Vale's face hardened. "And if I don't?" I smiled and placed the flash drive on the hood of his Ferrari. "Then this footage goes to every news outlet in the city, along with your Instagram posts, your text messages to Clara from the past 3 months, and a detailed timeline of your attempts to pursue a married woman. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a chance to do the right thing before I do it for you." Vale stared at the flash drive like it was a live grenade. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Davidson. I have lawyers, investigators, connections you can't imagine. And I have evidence of you harassing my wife in front of 300 witnesses." I turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Vale? You might want to check your car before you drive it. Someone keyed it last night." I hadn't actually keyed his car, but the suggestion was enough to send him scrambling around the Ferrari, looking for damage that didn't exist. It was petty, but watching him panic was deeply satisfying. The elevator arrived just as Vale started shouting threats at my back. I waved goodbye as the doors closed, already planning my next move. By noon, the story had exploded across social media. Someone had leaked audio from the gala of Vale making crude comments about Clara to his drinking buddies. Someone had also provided reporters with screenshots of text messages between Clara and Vale, messages that went back months and were far more intimate than anything a married woman should be sending to another man. I had no idea who this mysterious leaker might be, but I certainly appreciated their thoroughness. Clara called me 17 times that afternoon. I let every call go to voicemail. Tessa called me twice. Those calls I answered. "You need to stop this," she said without preamble. "Clara's career is being destroyed." "Clara's career is being exposed," I corrected. "There's a difference. David, you're making a mistake. Clara has powerful friends, and so do I. If you don't back down, we'll be forced to take defensive action." "What kind of defensive action?" "The kind that reveals your own secrets. Everyone has them, David. Even you." The line went quiet for a moment. Tessa was fishing, trying to see if I'd panic and reveal something she could use against me, but I'd been preparing for this conversation. "Actually, Tessa, I'm glad you called. I've been reviewing some old files from my time at Hartwell Strategic, and I found something interesting. Do you remember the Vale Industries case from 3 years ago?" Silence. "The one where you represented the plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit, and somehow all the key evidence disappeared right before trial? The case that made your career when you negotiated a settlement that was suspiciously favorable to the defendants?" "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that might interest the State Bar Association, especially since I have copies of emails between you and Meridian's legal team discussing how to make those documents disappear." It was a bluff, but a calculated one. I'd done my research on Tessa Lynn, and the Meridian case had always seemed fishy. Her reaction told me I'd hit close to the mark. "You're playing a dangerous game, David." "No, Tessa. I'm playing the only game left." 3 days later, I was sitting in my office at Hartwell Strategic when my old friend Jake Morrison knocked on my door. Jake ran a small but highly effective cybersecurity firm, the kind that specialized in digital forensics and data recovery for corporate clients who needed to know what their employees were really doing. "You were right about the Lynn woman," Jake said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "She's been very busy." He handed me a tablet loaded with email chains, text messages, and financial records that painted a picture I hadn't expected. Tessa Lynn hadn't just been covering up Clara's affair with Richard Vale. She'd been orchestrating it. "Look at this." Jake pointed to an email dated 6 months earlier. "Tessa to Clara. Richard Vale is exactly the kind of connection you need to break into the Fortune 500 PR market. He's also recently divorced and notoriously susceptible to flattery from beautiful women." I scrolled through more messages, my anger building with each revelation. Tessa had coached Clara on how to approach Vale, what to wear to catch his attention, even what topics of conversation would appeal to his ego. She'd arranged for them to be seated together at multiple events, created opportunities for private conversations, and gradually escalated their relationship from professional to personal. But why? I asked. What does Tessa get out of this? Jake pulled up another set of documents. Revenge, mostly, and opportunity. Look at this email from 2 years ago. The message was from Tessa to someone named Patricia Wells, a partner at her law firm. Davidson cost me the Hartwell strategic account with his interference and his refusal to recommend our services to his other clients. He humiliated me in front of the entire board, and I won't forget it. I remembered that meeting. Tessa had been pitching legal services to Hartwell, but her proposal had been overpriced and her approach had been arrogant. I'd recommended against hiring her, and the board had agreed. It was business, nothing personal. Apparently, Tessa had seen it differently. She's been planning this for 2 years, Jake continued. Destroy your marriage, destroy your reputation, and position herself to take over Clara's PR business when Clara inevitably crashes and burns. The tablet showed more evidence. Tessa had been quietly reaching out to Clara's clients, suggesting that Clara was becoming unreliable and that they might want to consider alternative representation. She'd planted stories in industry publications questioning Clara's judgment and professionalism. She'd even arranged for the photographers to be at the Gala, ensuring maximum coverage of Clara's humiliation. She played everyone, I said, scrolling through the messages. Clara, Vale, even me. Not everyone, Jake corrected. She didn't count on you fighting back, and she definitely didn't count on you having friends who know how to dig up buried emails. I leaned back in my chair, processing the magnitude of Tessa's manipulation. She'd turned my wife against me, orchestrated an affair that would destroy Clara's reputation, and planned to profit from the wreckage. It was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely unforgivable. Jake, I need you to compile all of this into a comprehensive report. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction. I want a timeline that shows exactly how Tessa manipulated everyone involved. What are you planning? I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm planning to give Tessa Lynn exactly what she deserves. Public, complete, and irreversible destruction. That evening, I called Margaret Thornton and arranged a meeting for the following day. Then I called 3 investigative reporters who specialized in corporate corruption stories. Finally, I made one last call to the membership committee at the Metropolitan Club, where Tessa and Clara held their weekly power lunches. By tomorrow night, Tessa Lynn's carefully constructed world would be in ruins. And unlike her victims, she'd have no one to blame but herself. Clara tried calling me again that evening, but I didn't answer. Whatever she wanted to say, it was too late. The time for explanations and apologies had passed. Now it was time for consequences. The Metropolitan Club's main dining room was packed for the monthly membership luncheon. New York's elite gathered around white-clothed tables discussing business deals and charity events. I sat at a corner table, nursing a coffee and watching Tessa Lynn hold court near the windows, Clara beside her looking increasingly desperate as their lunch companions offered hollow sympathy for her ordeal. At exactly 2 o'clock, Margaret Thornton entered the dining room flanked by 2 FBI agents and a prosecutor from the Southern District of New York. The conversation in the room gradually died as people noticed the federal law enforcement presence. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, I apologize for the interruption, but we're here on official business. She gestured to one of the agents, who approached Tessa's table with a folder thick with documents. Ms. Tessa Lynn, you're under investigation for wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice in connection with the Meridian Industries case and several other matters. Tessa's face went white, but she maintained her composure. I'm sure there's been some mistake. No mistake, the agent replied, opening the folder. We have extensive documentation of your communications with opposing counsel in the Meridian case, including your coordination in the destruction of evidence and your receipt of payments from the defendant company. The dining room erupted in whispers. Clara looked confused, glancing between Tessa and the federal agents like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, but the agent wasn't finished. We also have evidence of your manipulation of Clara Davidson's relationship with Richard Vale, including your coaching of Mrs. Davidson to extract confidential business information from Mr. Vale for use in your other legal cases. Now Clara understood. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, horror, and finally rage, as she turned to stare at Tessa. You used me, Clara whispered, but in the silence of the dining room, everyone heard her. Clara, I can explain, Tessa started. You used me to get information from Richard. You coached me to seduce him, to get him to trust me, to tell me things about his business deals. Clara's voice was getting louder, more hysterical. "You destroyed my marriage for your legal cases." The federal agents stepped back, apparently content to let Clara's public breakdown do their work for them. Around the dining room, phones were appearing as members began recording the confrontation. "Clara, please, you're being emotional." Tessa tried again. "Emotional?" Clara stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "You manipulated me into having an affair. You destroyed my reputation, my career, my marriage, all so you could win some legal cases and get revenge on my husband?" The room was completely silent now, except for Clara's increasingly hysterical voice and the subtle sounds of phones recording everything. This was going to be all over social media within minutes, and on the evening news within hours. I chose that moment to stand up and walk over to their table. "Hello, Clara. Tessa." I nodded to each of them politely. "I thought you might want to know that I've provided the FBI with additional evidence regarding Tessa's activities, including recordings of her coaching sessions with you, Clara, and financial records showing payments from Vale Industries to several of Tessa's shell companies." Tessa's composure finally cracked. "You bastard. You planned this whole thing." "Actually, you planned this whole thing 2 years ago when you decided to destroy my marriage for revenge. I just figured out what you were doing and decided to return the favor." Clara was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part hatred, part desperation, part grudging respect. You knew. You knew what she was doing to me. I figured it out eventually. "The question is, Clara, what are you going to do now?" Before she could answer, one of the federal agents stepped forward. "Ms. Lynn, we'd like you to come with us for questioning. You're not under arrest at this time, but we strongly advise you to contact an attorney." As the agents escorted Tessa from the dining room, she turned back to look at me with pure venom in her eyes. "This isn't over, Davidson." "Yes, it is," I replied calmly. "Your law license will be suspended pending investigation, your clients are already fleeing, and by tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the city will know exactly what kind of person you really are. It's very much over." The dining room remained silent as Tessa was led away, but I could feel the weight of dozens of stares. Clara stood alone at her table, abandoned by her lunch companions, her reputation in ruins, her career destroyed, and her marriage over. "David," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 8 years, this woman who had let herself be manipulated into betraying everything we'd built together. "No, Clara, we can't." I walked out of the Metropolitan Club and into the afternoon sunshine, where reporters were already gathering for statements about the federal investigation. Behind me, I could hear Clara calling my name, her voice breaking with desperation. But I didn't turn around. Some things, once broken, can never be repaired. Some betrayals, once committed, can never be forgiven. The war was over, and I had won. But victory felt surprisingly hollow as I disappeared into the crowd of Manhattan pedestrians, just another anonymous face in the city that had witnessed the complete destruction of everything I'd once called my life. The reporters would get their story, the federal prosecutors would get their case, and I would get my revenge. It was exactly what I'd wanted, and it felt like nothing at all.